If you had been standing in that crowd, you would have smelled two things: the acrid stench of damp wood catching fire, and the sweat of thousands of onlookers radiating pure terror. And there, bound to that towering stake, was a frail old man, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, Jacques de Molay. History textbooks will tell you that before the flames consumed him, the old man cried out in grief and indignation, cursing the King of France and the Pope. But what the history books don't tell you is that he was smiling. Before the fire charred his skin, he fixed his gaze on the viewing platform, staring dead at the French King, Philip IV, a man dressed in finery, with a face so handsome it bordered on demonic. And on the Grand Master's lips, a grotesque arc formed. It wasn't a smile of despair. It was the cold sneer of a hunter watching his prey step into a trap. Grand Master Molay knew he would die that day, but he also knew that the Order's most precious cargo had been shipped out the night before. In that moment, Philip IV felt an inexplicable chill. This king, known as Philip the Fair, possessed physiological traits that were difficult for ordinary men to understand. He rarely blinked, and his body temperature was perennially lower than a normal human's. When the fire burned out and Molay's ashes were scattered into the Seine, the crowd dispersed. If you think the story of the Knights Templar ends there, you are dead wrong. This was merely the halftime break in a shadow war between humanity and an ancient species that has lasted for 1,000 years. To find the source of it all, we must turn the clock back to the year 1119. 9 destitute French knights arrived in Jerusalem. They were in rags, riding emaciated horses, yet they claimed they were there to protect pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. This, in itself, was a joke. How could 9 men protect a treacherous 70-kilometer mountain road? However, King Baldwin II of Jerusalem made a baffling decision. Instead of driving these 9 paupers away, he housed them in the most sacred location in the entire Christian world, upon the ruins of Solomon's Temple. This is the origin of the name Knights Templar. For the next 9 years, these 9 men effectively vanished. There were no patrol records, no recruitment records. Rarely was anyone seen leaving the Temple Mount. So, what were they doing for 9 years? It wasn't until the 19th century when Lieutenant Charles Warren of the British Royal Engineers conducted an archaeological excavation of the Temple Mount that the terrifying truth of those 9 years was revealed. Deep underground, dozens of meters down, Warren discovered a vertical shaft connecting to a complex labyrinth. He wrote in his diary, "There are obvious signs of excavation here, but the rock faces are smooth as mirrors. The tools used were not shovels, but some technology capable of melting rock at high temperatures." The Knights Templar were not digging for treasure. They were conducting containment. Fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls imply that Solomon's Temple was not an ordinary church, but a seal. Legend says King Solomon used a ring that could command demon gods to seal 72 of them in brass vessels and bury them underground. Please note, the demon gods here are not demons in the religious sense, but higher-order biological entities from before the Great Flood. In the Book of Enoch, that forbidden text removed from the canonical Bible, it records a group of fallen angels known as the Watchers, who descended to earth, mated with human women, and produced hybrid giants known as the Nephilim. The Church tells us the Great Flood destroyed them. But in their digging, the Knights Templar discovered a desperate fact. The flood did not drown everything. Some things hid underground. Some bloodlines blended into the human population. What those 9 knights dug up from beneath Jerusalem wasn't gold. It was a genetic map, a list recording which prominent human families had mixed with Nephilim blood. From that moment on, the mission of those 9 knights changed. They were no longer bodyguards. They became cleansers. Have you ever wondered why the Knights Templar were able to establish the first multinational banking system in human history in just a few decades? Textbooks say it was to make it convenient for pilgrims to deposit and withdraw money. Wrong. It was a Europe-wide bloodline tracking system. The Nephilim are not mindless beasts. Over thousands of years of reproduction, to survive, they gradually diluted their bloodline, evolving from giants several meters tall into humans with extraordinary intelligence, robust physiques, and immense charismatic dominance. Their only weakness is that they retained the habits of their ancestors. First, a pathological craving for rare metals. Gold is not just currency to them, it is a conductor for some ancient technology. Second, an obsession with rebuilding Tower of Babel-style mega-engineering projects. Third, extreme exclusionism and intermarriage to maintain blood purity. To hunt a tiger hiding in a crowd, you don't look for the tiger. You watch the butcher shop. To hunt the descendants of the Nephilim trying to rule the world, you watch the flow of money. The Knights Templar invented bills of exchange, loans, and ledgers to actually monitor the abnormal financial movements of European nobility. Which count suddenly bought a massive amount of gold? Which remote mountain region suddenly began constructing huge underground fortifications? Which 2 families that never interacted suddenly decided to intermarry? All the ledgers eventually converged at the Templar headquarters. Through the fluctuations in the numbers, they pinpointed the locations of those non-humans. Then the Order's armed forces would move out under the guise of escorting cargo. After that stronghold disappeared from the map, they would quietly withdraw. If the bank was the radar, then the cathedral was the turret. After returning from Jerusalem, the Knights Templar suddenly mastered hyper-advanced architectural technology and began a frenzy of building Gothic cathedrals across Europe. Chartres, Amiens. If you connect the locations of these buildings on a map, you will find they form precise geometric patterns. Mainstream architecture tells you the soaring spires are to reach closer to God. A lie. The famous alchemist Fulcanelli, in his book The Mystery of the Cathedrals, implied that Gothic cathedrals are actually giant acoustic resonance chambers. Although the Nephilim possess immense strength, the more sophisticated the organism, the more sensitive it is to the environment. In particular, their auditory systems and pineal gland structures are completely different from humans. When the massive pipe organs play at specific low frequencies, infrasound, combined with the cathedral's special dome structure and the labyrinthine floor tiles, it creates a sonic field that humans cannot hear, but which causes nervous system collapse in specific biological entities. Imagine the scene. One day in the Middle Ages, a Nephilim descendant hiding among the nobility walks into a cathedral. He looks just like an ordinary man. When the Mass begins and the giant pipe organ roars, ordinary people feel only solemnity. But this nobleman suddenly feels a splitting headache, perhaps even bleeding from his eyes and ears, his pupils reverting to their original vertical slits.
At that moment, the Knights Templar standing in the shadows would silently draw their swords. This wasn't worship. This was a security screening. By the end of the 13th century, the hunters were finally discovered by the prey. The French royal family gave birth to a perfect monster, Philip IV. Historical descriptions of him are full of dissonance. He was called the Statue King because he lacked human emotion. He could stare at you for an hour without flinching. His physical stamina during hunts far exceeded the strongest knights of the time, and he held a near physiological loathing for the Knights Templar.
Philip IV was likely the perfect product of Nephilim bloodlines after generations of purification. He no longer needed to hide like his ancestors. He wanted to turn the tables. October 13th, 1307, Friday. The reason this day became the unluckiest date in the West is that it was a carefully orchestrated counter-hunt. Philip exploited humanity's primal greed, allied with the similarly infiltrated high-ranking clergy, and launched that famous raid. But he miscalculated. Although he captured the Grand Master and burned thousands of knights, he did not find the three things he wanted most. First, the Knights Templars' massive fleet. Second, the bloodline list brought out of Jerusalem. Third, the legendary Head of Baphomet, which was actually a biological specimen and database brought from the underground. It is said that on the night before the raid, a fleet of 18 warships quietly sailed out of the port of La Rochelle. No one knows where they went. Some say they went to Scotland and helped Robert the Bruce win the Battle of Bannockburn. Others say they crossed the Atlantic to a continent that had not yet been discovered. If the Renaissance was humanity's counterattack, then World War II in the 20th century was the Nephilim's deathbed retaliation. We must talk about Nazi Germany. Have you ever found it strange why Hitler and SS leader Himmler were so obsessed with the occult? They established a special department, the Ahnenerbe, Ancestral Heritage Organization, to dig up graves all over the world. They went to Tibet to find Shambhala, to France to find the Holy Grail. After the Knights Templar fled, they lost their strongholds on land and became wanted criminals. So they took to the sea. Have you ever noticed the famous Jolly Roger pirate flag pattern? A skull plus two crossed bones. This wasn't meant to scare people. In the traditional burial customs of the Knights Templar, if a knight died in a foreign land and his body could not be returned, only his skull and two leg bones, femurs, were kept and buried in a cross shape. This represented resurrection after death. This wasn't just a pirate symbol. It was the identification code of the exiled Knights Templar. Starting in the 14th century, a strange group of pirates appeared in the Atlantic. They didn't steal grain, they didn't steal women. They specifically attacked gold transport ships belonging to the Vatican and the French crown. They were highly disciplined and possessed high tactical literacy. This was the militarization of the Knights Templar into a Marine Corps. The reason they insisted on going to the Americas long before Columbus was that, according to the ancient texts they dug up in Jerusalem, another branch of the Nephilim, possibly corresponding to the white gods in Maya or Aztec legends, was lurking in the New World. In Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, a building constructed decades before Columbus discovered America, the walls are carved with reliefs of corn, maize,
and aloe vera. Ask yourself, in 1446 Scotland, how did a stonemason know what American corn looked like? Unless the Knights Templar had already been there. They moved their base to the New World, continuing the unfinished war there. Although the main force fled to the New World, the spark of resistance on the European continent went underground. By the 15th century, a name we know well entered the stage: Leonardo da Vinci. Historians today call him a polymath, but if you look closely at his manuscripts, you will find that he was not just a painter, but an anatomist specializing in non-human biology. Da Vinci secretly dissected over 30 corpses in his lifetime. In the Vatican secret archives, there is rumored to be a redacted Da Vinci manuscript recording a specific cadaver. Externally, this body was human, but in the position of the pineal gland, Da Vinci found a crystal-like calcified structure, and the bone density was 3 times that of a normal human. This was the corpse of a Nephilim hybrid. Da Vinci, as a spiritual successor to the Knights Templar, later known as the Priory of Sion, hid the weaknesses of these monsters within his art. Please re-examine that world-famous drawing, the Vitruvian Man. A naked man, arms and legs spread, trapped within a circle and a square. Art history tells you this represents the golden ratio, but in the coded language of the hunters, this is actually a containment schematic. The square represents the material world, laws of physics, and the circle represents the spiritual world, divinity. Da Vinci was using geometry to tell future hunters, although these things possess divinity, as long as you use specific geometric structures and physical laws, you can trap them in flesh and blood and kill them. The Renaissance was not a carnival of art. It was humanity's first counterattack against that ancient species on a scientific level.
If the Renaissance was humanity's counterattack, then World War II in the 20th century was the Nephilim's deathbed retaliation. We must talk about Nazi Germany. Have you ever found it strange why Hitler and SS leader Himmler were so obsessed with the occult? They established a special department, the Ahnenebe, Ancestral Heritage Organization, to dig up graves all over the world. They went to Tibet to find Shambhala, to France to find the Holy Grail. Textbooks say they were crazy, trying to prove the Aryans were a god race. But what if it was true? In Nazi internal doctrine, they believed that Aryans were not modern Germans, but god-men who descended from the sky in ancient times. Sound familiar? Exactly. The so-called pure Aryan ancestors were actually the Nephilim from before the Great Flood. Himmler was effectively seduced by the remnant will of the Nephilim, or the bloodline families hiding behind the scenes. They induced the Nazis to start the war and conduct ethnic cleansing, not for territory, but for genetic purification, to clear living space for the return of the giants. This explains the biggest mystery at the end of World War II, the Antarctic expedition. After Germany surrendered in 1945, 2 German U-boats, U-530 and U-977, did not surrender. Instead, loaded with unidentified cargo and mysterious passengers, they vanished into the South Atlantic. Conspiracy theories speculate they went to Base 211 in Antarctica. The Knights Templar did not completely exterminate all the Nephilim because some of the highest-ranking progenitors hid in geothermal hollows under the thick Antarctic ice sheet during the Great Flood, entering a state of biological stasis. Hitler collected holy relics from all over Europe, including the Spear of Destiny, potentially hidden by the Templars, to awaken these allies sleeping beneath the ice. And the modern successors of the Knights Templar, who had by then infiltrated the Allied High Command, fought desperately to stop the Germans. In 1947, the U.S. Navy launched the famous Operation High Jump. Officially, it was an Antarctic expedition. In reality, this massive fleet of 4,700 men and an aircraft carrier went there to fight a war. The result? This invincible fleet was attacked by unidentified flying objects, saucer-shaped craft, in Antarctica, and returned in defeat. Perhaps the essence of World War II was a proxy war between the hunter faction, the Allies, within humanity, and the seduced slave faction, the Axis. The good news is, the hunters won. The bad news is, the thing under the ice might have been woken up. From the tunnels of Jerusalem to the pirate ships of the Atlantic, from Da Vinci's studio to the ice walls of Antarctica, if you piece together these scattered fragments of history, you get a suffocating panoramic view. In this war spanning thousands of years, the Knights Templar never truly disappeared. They just became more secretive, more professional. Today, when we talk about the deep state, about the mega corporations controlling global medicine, finance, and media, you must learn to distinguish which part is the bloodline family, Nephilim descendants, trying to control humanity, and which part is the modern order existing to check and balance them. When you see Elon Musk frantically wanting to send humans to Mars, is it because he has vision? Or is it because he knows the countdown clock deep beneath the Earth is about to hit zero? When you see that the logo of CERN, European Organization for Nuclear Research, is a stylized 666, and a statue of Shiva the Destroyer stands in front of the Large Hadron Collider, are they really studying particle physics? Or are they trying to use technology to open the dimensional gate sealed by King Solomon? We cannot know the whole truth. As ordinary people, we can only peek at the tip of the iceberg of that grand world through these clues in the cracks of history. But please remember, the next time you pass an old Gothic cathedral or see a Da Vinci painting in a museum, do not just treat them as works of art. They may be distress signals left by our ancestors written in blood, or perhaps field manuals for war. The fire of 1314 did not burn the soul of the Knights Templar. It simply burned that fire into the genes of every one of us.